the real part begins, right? Why you're all here. So give me a quick show of hands. How many of you have had any course in ecology? Okay. How many of you have had any course in hydrology? Almost all of you. That's great. And how many of you had like done any research, any reading about ecohydrology? What is ecohydrology? So one of you. Okay, great. So things that we are going to be presenting is going to be really new to you, and that will make your experience much more meaningful. So what I am expecting, and you will see this for every lecture we have got, is what is the learning objective. You know, at the end of the course, what is it I am hoping for you to get? And I'm hoping that at the end of this lecture, you will have a conceptual understanding of ecology-hydrological cycle. You would understand the interlinkages between ecological and hydrological processes and how they work together. And you will be able to assess or evaluate the role of anthropogenic activities in alteration of ecosystems and in alteration of hydrological cycles. So this is what I am hoping to get by end of lecture today. And so let's start with a quick video. This is a trip I took about 4 years ago to Peru in South America. And I was there working with one of the universities there, trying to help set up and improve the research infrastructure on ecology, hydrology, ecosystem management, environmental engineering, etc. And we were driving from the university to one of the research centers. And I took that video thinking about where is ecology and where is hydrology here. And the green spaces that you see in that part of the country is in a narrow band along the river that flows through Andes desert in Peru. And rest of the landscape, it's devoid of any vegetation. And that is, so this is what I'm talking about. This is the part in Peru that we were, Sierra Desert that we were driving through. And you contrast that with what you see in Amazon rainforest within the same country. The rainfall here is less than 1 inch per year, less than 25 millimeters. Whereas rainfall here in green part in Amazon forest is more like 300 inches per year. And you see the difference. Rainfall and hydrology in turn makes to the ecosystem in the landscape. But it's not one-way interaction. There is a lot more rainfall in Amazon rainforest because of the ecology, because of the vegetation that exists there, and because of the active feedback that happens between ecology and hydrology. And that's one of the learning objectives I hope to have with you as we move forward. And so when we talk about ecohydrology, it is an interaction of ecology and hydrology, and how do they work together to shape the landscape, as you saw in the video, and as you can contrast that with the Amazon rainforest in the same country, just a difference of a few kilometers. So we are going to be focusing on just a few key concepts in ecology today, and how we study the relationships among living organisms and their environment. And these environments include both biotic factors as well as abiotic factors. Abiotic factors such as the temperature, such as living conditions, and biotic factors include their relationship with other organisms. Then ecohydrology includes those concepts in looking at ecosystem assessment, how the hydrology is affecting ecology and how ecology is affecting hydrology, because it is a very much two-way process. And then it focuses on how water availability and movement impacts ecosystems and how ecosystems in turn influence hydrologic cycle. So I will go quickly through some of the key terms so that you are familiar with those. Starting from what is ecology to ecosystems, you may have heard all these terms, but I want to remind you about what do they mean, because we will be using those terms a lot throughout next 5-day period. And as you get into the modeling part and start hands-on simulations, you will be able to come back and relate to some of these concepts. What are the biotic and abiotic factors? What is the food chain and what is the food web? Biodiversity, what is niche? Population ecology, community ecology, what is the carrying capacity for any ecosystem? What is ecological succession? Some of these terms I want to talk about. And so we talked about ecology, and it is a study of how organisms, from single cell organisms to very, very complex organisms such as humans, interact with each other and with their environment. Ecosystem looks at the community level, community of living organisms where there are multiple organisms present and they are interacting with each other, and their non-living environment such as temperature and water availability, etc. These environments consist of both biotic and abiotic factors. Biotic factors are living parts of an ecosystem, such as the food that we consume and our relationship with food production, as well as abiotic factors that are non-living and such as hydrology and different components of hydrology. Food chain and food web determines what happens in an ecosystem, right? And what kind of food is available and how that moves through different trophic levels. So food chain is a sequence of organisms where each one is consumed by an organism of higher order. And so, for example, plankton, the algae growing in the bottom of a stream is taken up by bugs, but which is taken up by fish, and it moves up the food chain in a very successive way. And food web is a complex network of interconnected food chains that allow how energy and nutrients move through an ecosystem. Biodiversity refers to the variety of life in a particular ecosystem, and it is very important. We will talk about that. On an earth, on the earth, including species, genetic differences among those organisms and ecosystems, right? So it's very important that any environment that we live or we create or we work with, there is a good bit of biodiversity, because that what moves the energy through the system, and it moves the energy efficiently through the system. Niche. What is a niche? Niche is it plays a very specific role or a function of an organism within an ecosystem, including how it gets its food, how it interacts with other organisms, and how it contributes to the flow of energy and nutrients. So can someone think about an example of a niche? in an ecosystem by any organism? Trees. So tell me more. Photosynthesis that produces, takes the carbon from atmosphere through, yeah. So that's a very good example. Other good example is along those ways, woodpeckers, right? These birds that peck on the trees. And it's an example of a niche. What does that do? It's trying to find the bugs that live inside the bark. And so it takes those bugs and eat those bugs. In that way, the tree is healthier because it is not invaded or it is not infested by bugs that might inversely impact the health of the tree. And as it is pecking, it creates a small hole where other small birds can come and live and lay their eggs, and their offsprings come out. So that's an example of a niche where a woodpecker is living with a tree, taking out the bug that is helpful to the woodpecker, is harmful to the tree, and in the turn creating an ecosystem where other birds can come and thrive. And so looking at the niche in the ecosystem is very important because all these things are interrelated. Population ecology. In population ecology, we study how populations of species grow, shrink, and interact with their environment. It could be population of trees in a forested area, or population of any particular animals in an ecosystem. And then the community ecology, looking at interaction among species. The example that I gave you, how a bird is interacting with a tree, which is, how that is interacting with insects. And that interaction is very important. In last 10 years or so, because of the climate change, there is an insect called emerald ash borer moving through USA. And emerald ash borer is not native to the US, it came from Asia. And so it has no natural predator in the ecosystem. And once it gets underneath the bark of a tree, it can cut through and the tree becomes dead. As a result, literally millions and millions of trees have died because of imbalance in community ecology. When I was at Purdue, I had two beautiful ash trees in my front yard. Both were more than 50 years old. And both of them, I watched it die slowly because of the emerald ash borer. And it was a daily reminder to me how an imbalance in community ecology can affect us personally when you don't think about it often. Carrying capacity is something that a maximum number of individuals or a species can sustain in an environment that is based on available resources like food, like water, or like shelter. And then ecological succession, what you see in this picture is how a process by which the structure of a biological community evolves over time. So if there is a wetland, for example, and the wetland will have the wetland plants such as the reed grass, and if the wetland goes dry, then over time reed grass will die, and it will be taken over by small plants and shrubs, and then over several decades it will be taken over by large trees, and then you go back and you see no traces of wetland that might have existed there at any point. And that's what ecological succession deals with. So ecology by nature is very, very interdisciplinary, and it interacts with these different fields of study such as geology and atmospheric sciences, because much of input comes through that, looking at hydrology because it brings water, genetics of different organisms, physiology, biochemistry, and behavior. So understanding those interactions and understanding those linkages are very important. Such as environmental chemistry and physics, because they delve into chemical processes within an ecosystems, including nutrient cycles and pollution. Wetlands work very differently than small rivers and streams, because wetlands are mostly anaerobic in the process, whereas streams are mostly aerobic. And the processes that are happening, and because of those differences in processes, the chemistry that takes place is very, very different. Social sciences, how we interact with our environment impacts what happens to the ecology, and it impacts how we manage our landscapes. And then environmental economics, where we put the value on environmental benefits that we are getting, and we will talk a lot as we go through the workshop. We will talk a lot about ecosystem services and how do we quantify those, how do we value those. So here is an example of human activities that may affect what happens in the ecosystem. In the beginning, the hunting and gathering may have resulted into some of the species going extinct, and there have been many, many species that have gone extinct. It's happening even now that lots of species are becoming totally extinct because of the human activities. Agriculture, which is part of our existence, and we need it because we need food, resulted into a green revolution, and green revolution made the world food secure, or most part of the world food secure, but it also resulted into many environmental challenges. It provided us enough food, but because there was a need to increase the agricultural production substantially, the use of pesticides and fertilizers increased quite a bit, and the nature of agriculture shifted to monoculture, one particular crop, right? So there are fields that just grow rice, there are fields that just grow wheat, and that has resulted into significant ecological degradation in the system, in the environment. Then population growth and industrial growth that has happened has certainly improved our standard of living, but at the same time it has increased pollution. Last year, not last year, it was still this year, in January I visited India, and I wanted to go to my hometown, Prayagraj, in January, and I could not reach there. Every flight going to Prayagraj was cancelled. Most trains that were going were cancelled because of the smog, and the flight that was reaching to Delhi was delayed so much that even if I tried, I could not have got my train to reach from Delhi to Prayagraj. And that's an extreme example of pollution that happens, but it's something that we live on a daily basis. And so that's the cost of improving the quality of life. And when you go and if you visit those kind of places, I've been to Delhi, I've been to Beijing, China, many times. First time when I went there and I went for a run, I like running, and I thought that I was getting sick. I was not getting sick. It was the air that I was breathing that was making me feel like I was getting sick. So, continuing with anthropogenic processes, pollution from industrial and agricultural sources have led to significant contamination or pollution to water, air and soil that is impacting ecosystem health. Agricultural activities such as over dependence on fertilizers in food production induces excess nutrients. We are applying a lot more fertilizer because we need to produce the food that is needed. And it leads to issues like eutrophication in water bodies. How many of you have heard about that term, eutrophication? What is eutrophication? Tell me, what is eutrophication? You don't need to stand up. And when I ask a question, please don't stand up. Just so excess amount of nitrogen and sulfur in lakes. Okay, so that's what causes eutrophication, but that itself growth of algae, which is really the eutrophication, right? So when there is excess nutrients in fresh water bodies or excess nutrients in salt water bodies, it results into excess growth of algae. That itself is not a problem. What is a problem is because algae is a living organism. It does primarily two things. In the daytime, it is photosynthesizing, and that's how algae grows. So as a part of photosynthesis, it is producing oxygen, which is good for the water. You need a lot of oxygen for other organisms to survive and thrive in the water. But what happens in the night time is the problem. Because it is a living organism, it's breathing, right? Through the respiration process in the night time, it gets the oxygen from the water. And oxygen content in the water goes very, very low. When the oxygen concentration is less than 2 milligram per liter, the fish will die. And that's what becomes a problem. Other problem with eutrophication is that because there is an excess algal production, and if that water body is used as a drinking water source, the last process in drinking water purification is chlorination, right? Water is supplied with chlorine because it is antimicrobial. It kills all the microbes that is there, and water that comes to your home is safe. If there is any amount of algae that is left in the water before it is chlorinated, that algae will interact with chlorine and will produce a compound called trihalogen methane, THM. And THM is carcinogenic. So it becomes very, very expensive to treat the water that is eutrophic, because you cannot afford to have any amount of algae left in the water before you mix that with the chlorine. And because of that, globally, there are many cases that drinking water supply is shut off because the city was not ready to handle that kind of high organic matter in the water. And therefore, they could not create a safe water supply, and they could not send a safe water supply to the homes. So it's a real issue that happens. It disrupts the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium cycles. And it is also being aggravated by climate change, which is driven by human activities, that further exacerbates these issues by altering temperature and precipitation patterns. So here is a figure of what we see This is pre-industrial, pre-green revolution time. And if you look at the blue chart, this is around time when the green revolution came to the world, not just to India, but to the world. And with the green revolution came the excess use of fertilizers. And it increased exponentially. Green revolution was needed. That's what made India food secure. And if it was not for the green revolution, I don't know how India as a country would have sustained that many people. And no one can be secure if it is food insecure. If you have to depend on somebody else to provide you food, it doesn't matter what else you do, you are not going to be secure. It is key to the national security. And so what green revolution did to India was made it a very secure nation. And it did that in other parts of the world. And if you look at the countries that are considered poor, that's where the positive impacts of green revolution has not reached there yet, or has not been fully realized. But what has it done to eutrophication? And what you see that during that time, the eutrophication of the water bodies also started to increase substantially. So can someone tell me when let's take a crop, what is the most, like, what are 2 or 3 top crops in here in Telangana? Paddies and cotton, maize. Okay, so let's take the example of maize. Corn. How much nitrogen is needed for corn production? Someone? You're all engineers, right? That's why you don't know. I'm an engineer. I can make a joke. About 150 kilograms per acre. How much of that is actually utilized by the plant? Make a guess. What percentage of what you apply is actually taken up by the plant? 20 to 30%, yeah, so no more than 50%, right? So what you are doing is you are applying twice as much as what is needed. It's like you need certain amount of medicine and you take 2 pills. What happens to the second pill that our body does not synthesize? It gets back to the environment, right? That's the problem here. Nitrogen is applied way more than what is needed, and therefore the excess gets into the surface water bodies or groundwater bodies, either through the process of runoff or through the process of deep percolation. And when it gets to the groundwater, it stays there. But when it gets to the surface water, both nitrogen and phosphorus in fresh water bodies, phosphorus is the limiting nutrient. And in salt water bodies, generally speaking, nitrogen is the limiting nutrient. It means that whenever a freshwater body sees excess phosphorus, suddenly there will be an outburst of algal production in that water body. And when it gets to the ocean, too much nitrogen, and you see a lot of algal growth happening. And that's what we see here as a result of green revolution. Also, so therefore it is very important that you understand the nutrient cycles, and as you go through the SWOT modeling, you will look at different components of nutrients. You will look at how much is applied for certain land use, how much gets into the runoff, how much goes to the groundwater. You will evaluate the nutrient cycle in terrestrial and both terrestrial and aquatic environments, and how that is interacting with the ecosystem through the processes of photosynthesis, decomposition, nitrogen fixation, actively driving and regulating nutrient cycles. You will get to see those numbers. And my hope is that as we go through that, you will develop a common sense of what is happening, what is not important, what is important is understanding these processes, not so much the exact number. So if I told you that, for example, certain farmer is applying, or if you come and ask me how much fertilizer I should apply in my cornfield, and I tell you 500 kilogram per hectare, you should immediately know that that number is wrong, right? It's not important that based on the variety you know that whether it's 140 kilograms or 145 kilograms or 132 kilograms, but as a good scientist you should be able to tell what is wrong. You may not know the right answer, but you should absolutely know the wrong answer. And I hope that as we go through the exercise, you will develop some common sense of what numbers make sense. So energy and nutrient cycles such as nitrogen cycle, we will get to see lots of examples and what happens, how much is it in soil versus taken up by the plants versus it gets into the water, etc., and how it moves through different pools. You will get to analyze that. And then excess nitrogen that gets and phosphorus that gets into runoff, how that might be contributing to eutrophication, that leads into the problems we are talking about. Then energy cycle is equally important because that is what is moving the nutrients through different components. So looking at these different processes, nitrification, denitrification, how that relates to fertilizer applications, decomposition of plants, and how that affects the soil health and soil organic matter. Understanding those linkages is going to be quite important. And then linking that with the water balance, right? Looking at precipitation and what happens to the precipitation, what component is intercepted versus what gets to the soil, depending upon the characteristics, how much will infiltrate versus how much will run off, how that will contribute to antecedent moisture conditions, how much will get into groundwater, and all of that, their relationship with ecology. So this is not a very good picture, but I hope you all understand the hydrologic cycle. If I tell you that there will be a rainfall of 2 inches tomorrow on NIT Warangal campus, how many of you can tell me how much will be runoff? I don't need the number, I just need to know that you know how to do that hydrologic analysis. If it rains 2 inches tomorrow to NIT Warangal campus, do you all feel comfortable that you will be able to calculate how much runoff will be generated? How would you do that? Someone said yes, I didn't see who said yes, but how would you do that? Okay. Okay, so that's the process, right? How would that convert that into a number? 2 inches of rainfall. How many inches of runoff? Okay, so that's a guess. Somebody else? You are teaching the class, Asif, you are not allowed to answer. Sorry. Someone else. Let's make it interactive, folks. I mean, there is no wrong answer. I just want to know your thought process. Runoff coefficient. Yeah, that's one way to do that. How would you determine the runoff coefficient for Warangal campus? Okay, so let's say that 30% of the campus. About what percentage of campus is impervious? 30%, and 70% is under vegetation. What will be the runoff coefficient? Okay, so runoff will be little more than 30% that you said, according to that method. I'm looking for something else. These are all good ways to do that, but I'm looking for something else. Someone else, tell me. Curve number value. Tell me more. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So it rained earlier this week, right? It rained 2 days ago. So AMC will be quite high. How many of you are familiar with curve number method? Yeah, you were saying something. It's a good guess. No, it's a good guess, right? But you have to. Are you all? Is anyone not engineer here? Well, how many of you are engineers? Let me rephrase that question. Are doing engineering, right? Quite a few. The reason I'm asking is, if I challenge you to back up your claim, you should be able to prove that, right? And one way to make it challenge proof is have an exact method to do that. Curve number does that, right? So the curve number for concrete is actually higher than 70. It's more close to 100. It may not be 100, but it will be close to 100. More like 95 or 98. Curve number for other areas will be more like 30. And so you can calculate an aggregate curve number. Once you have the curve number, then you can use the curve number method, P minus 0.2 S square divided by P plus 0.8 S, right? And if S is greater than precipitation, then runoff is 0, otherwise there is a number. So understanding, that's one component runoff, right? And if I ask you how much will be infiltrated, then there will be different understanding those different components is important. And if you're working in water resources area, make sure that you absolutely understand every component of hydrologic cycle. And you understand how to do that, right? How to quantify that, how to come up with a number. Because end of the day, that's what will distinguish you from someone who is not an expert in that area. And then, so here is an example, right? Rainfall comes and then part of that get intercepted, and then rest gets through the through fall. There will be feedback through evapotranspiration. Some of that will directly go to the stream as a runoff. Then there will be an infiltration. With that, there will be a dissolved nutrients that will be taken up by the plant to support the plant growth. Excess will get into vadose zone or unsaturated zone, and then further excess will get to the shallow and then further to the deep aquifer. Understanding these interactions plant and water and soil interaction is very important, and we will get to see some of those numbers as you get into the SWOT modeling. And so, to summarize, it is important for you to understand ecology, and I hope that it's really some of those concepts you come out with better than today. End of 5 days, you will have a better understanding of ecology and why we need to include ecology and ecological concepts into hydrological concepts to come up with a solution to sustainable watershed management, because that is very, very important. It emphasizes the interconnectedness of biotic and abiotic factors. When you are just looking at hydrology, it ignores many of the biotic factors. It looks at the vegetation and it looks at the evapotranspiration, but it does not look at any more detail than that. It does not look at the interactions between microbes and plant roots and how that is impacting the soil health, how that is impacting the health of the plants. It is the interdisciplinary nature of the environmental science that integrates the field of hydrology, chemistry, biology, and social sciences to effectively address hydrological challenges. And never underestimate the power of social sciences. Throughout my career, I have worked very closely with social scientists, because very early I had a realization that it doesn't matter how elegant my engineering solutions are. If they are not socially acceptable and if they are not economically feasible, it's not going to make any difference. It will just be a publication in a journal that will go on my CV and will have no real impact, right? So, working with those scientists, social scientists, and ecologists, in this case, is going to be very, very important. Key concepts such as ecosystems, nutrient cycles, and energy flow is crucial for recognizing how anthropogenic activities disrupt the natural processes, and dynamics of water balance and plant-soil water interactions highlight the importance of maintaining ecosystem health. You contrast that, the video I showed you from Peru, my trip to Peru, to your campus here in Warangal. And it's very two different kinds of ecosystems. It's because the hydrology is different and because its ecology is different and the way they're interacting together. So what we need is really a comprehensive approach to manage and restore ecosystems, and it can be done only when you combine ecology with hydrology. Ignoring other area is going to be